Okay, I think we should start now. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I welcome you all to the session today. I am Fasiul Hassan, working as the IT manager at National Incubation Center. And we have this training session today about quality assurance and DevOps. And we have our trainer, Jawad Cheema, with us for this session. The topic of today's session is basic tools and techniques for improving software delivery. And in this topic, in this session, we will cover various topics. And this session is mostly it is a general session. It is open for all, whoever want to join and attend the session. And it is mostly specifically targeted for some certain groups. For example, it is targeted for startups who want to get started with QA or DevOps for their softwares if they're working on some software. And it is for business developers, business owners, or some product owners who want to learn about quality assurance, software quality assurance and DevOps. This is also focused for software developers and engineers who want to explore quality assurance and DevOps as a career option. For this session today, we have our speaker, Jawad Cheema, with us. Let me introduce Jawad. Jawad has done his master's in computer science, and he's focused around software development and quality assurance and DevOps. He's a DevOps consultant and trainer, and he has a 12 years plus experience of DevOps and software trainings. He's a trainer as well, and he's currently teaching at at Information Technology University. In this session, he will talk about how to build basic understanding of software delivery and quality, and what are the roles of software developers in assuring that. So heading over to you, Jawad, I think we should start the session from you.
Thank you, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good to have you all, and hopefully, thanks for the introduction as well. Hopefully, this will be useful for all the participants and all the listeners across different platforms. So, should we start with this screen sharing and start with the session?
Yes.
Okay, just. Okay, so I think like already introduced Fasi introduced me. So basically, I'm a QA and DevOps engineer and working as a consultant and trainer as well. Teach as a visiting faculty at ITU and FAST. Also have a basic startup, a small company, Questa Digital. It's not really a startup or company. It's just we come together to learn new things and experiment. So yeah, and overall I have 12 plus years of experience. Luckily I've been with the grace of Allah, I've been able to get a versatile experience. I started off my career in the embedded systems, which helped me learn about safety and security critical solutions, standard compliances. Then later on, the later half of my experience is on e-commerce platform, which are consumer centric, so very fast and agile, right? So based on those, I will be sharing what I understand of QA and DevOps. So hopefully it will add some value, or at least get something, give something useful to the audience, right? And yeah, like Fasi mentioned, this session will be a bit interactive, so feel free to jump in, share your questions, share your opinions, so that we can discuss around what is more important for the audience rather than just going through the slides, right? So we have in general what we will be covering is what DevOps is, where it helped after we got the agile, right? So Then we will discuss about automation, which I feel is the key enabler. Automation is not the only thing. In fact, it's just one part of the DevOps, but still automation became the key enabler for the adoption of DevOps. So we will discuss a bit on that, and then discuss a bit on what DevOps is beyond automation. Then we will switch to quality assurance and start discussing about that, and discuss about it with respect to agile and DevOps, and then some testing techniques so that we can help ourselves improve, understand what quality testing is, or quality assurance is, so that we can improve our analysis of products, whether it's product owners or developers themselves or QAs. And then again, automation is important in agile and DevOps. So we will discuss a bit on test automation, right? Yeah, and firstly, just let me know if there's any lag or anything on slides or communication. So yeah, just feel free to ping me if there's anything.
Yeah, okay. I think we are okay for now, but I'll let you know if something's there.
Great. So yeah, I think before we start, just can the audience can people share a bit more on what your current role is in company in chat, maybe if that is possible. Fasi, will they be able to share? Yeah, okay, I can see. Yeah, thanks for joining, Shazib. Nice. Thanks for sharing the information, Shaista.
Yes, Jawad, what do you want? Sorry.
Just if the audience can share a bit more on what their current role is,
Okay.
so that we can understand a bit more on what kind of people are listening in.
Okay, fine.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing, Ali. Thank you again, Ali. Okay, so I think we can move forward, right? So thank you for sharing, and yeah, hopefully I don't have specifically tools for AWS, but we can discuss that as well. And for if you want to understand as a carrier, DevOps as a carrier, so we will be discussing a few tools. So that may be helpful on where to get started if you want to switch to DevOps, right? Uh, and of course, application, if you are working on any kind of software solution, so DevOps is really a key now. So we need to, it will be helpful, right? So just to, before we get started into DevOps, just a quick diagram, right? Basically, how agile helped us. So if we took look back before agile, what was happening is all the typical software development models were kind of like everyone was isolated in their own environment. So we teams, there were separate requirement engineer teams, separate developers, separate testers, right? And everyone was only responsible for moving balls from their bucket to the other one's bucket, right? So uh, requirement engineer would say, I've analyzed these requirement, documented them, and then handed over to the developers, right? So agile helped us in actually optimizing this. So what agile helped us is that let's come together, have a common bucket, work together, and focus on collaboration, right? Firstly, we have a hand raise. Does it help anything, or can we take advantage of this? Sorry, you're on mute, I think. Fasi, you're on mute.
Sorry for that. Yes, we're okay. We can go. We have a question from Shaista Aman. Can you see the question?
I cannot see the question.
Okay. So somebody, Shaista Aman is asking, will we discuss AWS DevOps best practices today?
Not with the respect to the AWS tools itself, but with respect to the GitLab CI/CD, so the same concepts can be applied on AWS tools.
Okay. Okay, we should continue.
Okay. So, sorry. Okay, so basically, we were talking about Agile, right? So Agile helped us, the developers, requirement engineers. So you have product owners, developers, process people, Scrum Master, and also get involvement of all of the stakeholders through planning and review meetings, right? So everyone now shared a responsibility of moving everything to the uh, uh, bucket of completing a development process, right? But then um, after Agile, there was one more bottleneck that was there. So the development team was responsible for filling the bucket for the operations team so that the product changes can be released to the customer, right? So there was still a layer segregating the new features to be delivered to the customer, right? So so this is basically was resulting in kind of similar situation that was before. Of course, it was much improved, but still, like you can have multiple new piece of code ready to be deployed or ready to be released to customers within a day, but operations would require days or weeks or even months, depending on the overall process to release to the customer, right? So then the main goal of DevOps was to actually make it so that the product can actually, all the team members can come together to actually release it to the customer, right? So the main goal is delivering to the customer. So that should be the goal of all the team members. It should not be like I'm done with the development part, now we operations team need to take over, right? So that was the main goal of DevOps. It was a movement, not really a process or a model. And even at the moment, if you think about it or you explore about it, you will see tons of definitions. There are no single set of principles, just like the Agile had, because it was really a movement. And but with respect to the advancements in tools and technologies, it started to become a more organized process. So people have started to define some principles and processes around it. So we will be discussing a bit on that. So yeah, yeah, we can discuss about the site reliability engineer with DevOps engineer a bit later. But with respect to the role itself, just a quick one that s- basically there are multiple different responsibilities that come in the operations side, right? So basically one is delivering the product, one is making sure the product is available, and then monitoring and observing and making sure that the performance of the overall application is optimized for the customers, right? So there are different other aspects, security as well. So depending on the size of the product and the operations and DevOps teams, so you can have separate segregation. So if it's a smaller team, then of course the DevOps and site reliability engineer will be responsible. There will not be any segregation, but if the team is large enough, then you actually allocate responsibilities, and once you segregate the responsibilities, so site reliability engineers would be a bit more responsible for observability and remediation of any trouble issues. So basically making sure that we have sufficient availability, sufficient security, and sufficient performance, and we are able to self-heal the infrastructure. Yeah, I think so. Coming back to the DevOps part, so that is the main thing, right? So can you again use the chat and share a bit on like what the done definition is whenever you are? I hope the teams are working on agile already. So what do you consider when a task is done? What in your company, what do you feel, or when you say from a development perspective, when do you say that a particular user story is completed? uh, yeah, the presentation, Ali, the presentation will be shared. I think recordings will also be available. So yeah. Yeah, here actually that's the question, like what is your criteria? Okay, when the evaluation criteria is met, right? So what do you mean by evaluation criteria? Is it like when the feature is tested and actually shipped to the customer, or uh, when you actually uh, uh, when you have just tested within the team, right? For Shaista, feature is ready, test and tested to ship, right? So tested to ship, that's the done definition, right? Okay, thank you for participating. So basically, the goal of DevOps should be when the feature is actually delivered to the customer, right? Of course, it will vary a bit more on the product, the type of product that you are working on. It will vary a bit more for SaaS platforms, for mobile platforms, for but still, the main goal is criteria. We have a shared responsibility, so the done definition should be when the feature, every individual piece of code is actually going to the customer, right? So it's not like you are not talking about that a particular feature is in branch, we have worked on it, it's complete, it's in particular branch, and it can be released to customer anytime, so we are marking it as done. No, it should be like uh, mm, it is actually gone to the customer. There are different ways we can enable disable features. So it may be that we have currently disabled it. We are planning to release it on any particular separate day, but it should be that a particular task of changing a color, moving the button position, or any layout changes or any functionality changes, right? uh, they are actually released to customers. So that should be the goal of any organization if they are really trying to adopt DevOps. So uh, yeah, so basically that's the definition of done with respect to DevOps. And now, before you won't see any separate slide related to whether DevOps is important for a startup or not. Why? Because for a startup, the key need of any startup is adopting to change and delivering, right? So that means one of the key important factors of any startup is to have this same done definition that is DevOps offering, right? So by nature, the DevOps done definition aligns with the needs of startups, right? So that is why I feel that there's no separate need to discuss whether DevOps or approach is important for a startup. Of course, we will discuss like where to start and how much can be done. But the thing is that this done definition aligns with the needs of startup. So we should always get started on DevOps from the start. So the important aspect for DevOps, why all these things were possible, because of the automation, different new tools and techniques that were offered that automated most of the activities of deployment of building the packages, deploying this application, upgrading the infrastructure, or even making modifications and uh, mm, changing, optimizing the infrastructure, scaling up the infrastructure according to the traffic, right? Monitoring and alerting of anything goes wrong. And this is the key as well, right? If we are constantly making the changes, then probability of introducing issues increases. The important aspect is that we have more visibility on the impact of each change, so that we can understand if there's anything that we have done wrong. So alerts, monitoring and alerts, which should be focusing on the observability. Yeah, so blue-green deployments are also part of this. So basically, that's the blue-green deployments, rollout approach, or any other kind of deployment approaches. Uh, Make sure that whenever we are constantly releasing new things, we are not causing any downtime for customers. They don't feel a change, right? So these are important. And one of the important thing that I was discussing just earlier as well, that feature management, right? So we should be enable and disable features. uh, uh, I think we can come to this one about the development a bit later, right? So feature management is when we want to develop a piece of code or a functionality that is incomplete, so we can continue to release those changes to the production, but then later on enable or disable at any point. And this is also useful for A/B testing as well, and enabling a feature for a time period just to analyze the impact, or disable if there's anything that we have seen an issue on production after the release. So this is also one key important aspect for the continuous delivery that we discussed earlier, where the done definition is releasing to customer. So, and the DevOps, like I said, is not just automation or the continuous delivery. It's also about other aspects. So that includes communication and collaboration and automation. So there are concepts like Slack Ops, where the communication is directly connected with the operations. So your tools of communication, your mechanism of coordinating task management, they are all linked to it, and there's enough traceability. You connect your Jira to code repository, and repository is connected to pipelines. So yeah, uh, if we look at this diagram, don't get overwhelmed over it, but yeah. And even this whole you can see these tools, these are just some subset of the tools available. There's a lot more available out there for different purposes. So that is actually what we mean when we say that the tools and technology nowadays enabled us to move forward with the DevOps, right? And the key factor is the automation through these tools, right? So yeah, any questions on this so far, like for with respect to why DevOps is important and how on the basic understanding of automation. We will discussing a bit more later, but because now I would like to shift a bit more on the non-automation part, and then we'll discuss pipelines and tools, Docker and a few other tools as well. Yeah, with respect to the repository management, right? So there are a couple of different flows for repository management. There's a Git flow and a GitHub flow. So repository, the key enabler for repository management is nowadays Git. So I think you don't need to consider any other approach. Just go for Git, and it can be GitLab or GitHub or Bitbucket or any other on-site hosted solution. It can be done on AWS Code Repository Manager as well, but I think that depends on the company needs and overall integration. But GitLab and GitHub also support others direct integration with AWS, so they are sufficient. And with respect to how the process should be, so there are two main flows: GitHub Flow and Git Flow, right? There will be a slide later on as well. So that depends a bit more on uh, your release process, whether you have one single branch of truth, or you want to keep separate branches for releases, for your development, for test environments. So depending on these two approaches, you can look at GitHub Flow and Git Flow, and that would give you a basic idea of the two unique approaches that are typically followed. Yeah, with respect to GitHub Actions and CI/CD pipelines, we will come to that. So let's hold for off that question. Uh, with respect to the programming, DevOps sure need to learn programming, but it's on a different level. It needs to be, I think, one of the most common language that they need to learn is YAML, because most of them tools support automation through the YAML. We will see a couple of screenshots of those as well. And then every tool has its own approach as well. So like Dockerfile has its own syntax, and Docker Compose, again, it uses YAML. So YAML and all that. And with respect to process automation, you will have to learn a bit more on scripting languages. So it can be any scripting language, Python, Node.js, and Bash scripting. That depends on, with respect to Python or Go, that depends on your own preference, or the company, what the company is using in general, because the main goal of DevOps is to enable the developers and other team members. So you choose a language that is more suitable for the whole team rather than your own preference. Otherwise, Python and Go works effectively. Even JavaScript can be very useful for basic certifications. Is like a secondary thing. Certification, you can take advantage of the course outlines of a certification, but certification itself doesn't add value. It add values once you have the experience on it. That's what my personal opinion is. So because you need to learn something before you actually uh, get certified, and practical experience helps on learning. So once you have some sufficient practical experience, then it's important to do the certification, because typically that helps you broaden your understanding. When you have practical experience, you are most probably will be utilizing one or two different concepts that your company needs. But when you go for certification, you will learn a few more options beyond what you are using. So that is when I believe one should go for certification. But doing a certification at the start, I think typically it doesn't help much. Yeah, you can use the course outline to learn and see, prepare yourself for interviews if you want to enter in that career, but not that helpful. Okay, for with respect to the career, can we hold on those questions a bit later? Uh, so please, Ali, sorry to stop on this one, but we can discuss this a bit later. Yeah, thank you. So with respect to starting off, and this is again whether you are starting off as a DevOps career or you are starting off DevOps in your company, right? So the two main aspects, technical aspects, of course, again, there are other aspects as well, but the two main technical aspects that I'm going to discuss is which has worked for us in many different transitions. So you need to focus on automation of the application and automation of the infrastructure, right? So for the application part, what you can start off with containerizing. So Docker or containerization is an approach where you actually package the whole application along with all its dependencies. So it brings in automatic consistency of your development environments with your production environment. So I think that is typically a get to go point where any DevOps solution would be the starting point, that you need to containerize your application so that it can be constantly consistently developed and deployed, because later on that is what we want, that any changes done locally are tested in the similar environments and as production, and therefore goes to the production in a very similar fashion. And containerization is one of the main aspects for enabling that. Then you need delivery pipelines, just like GitHub Actions or Git CI/CD pipelines or AWS or Azure pipelines tools, right? Uh, so you can use any tools, but the main thing is setting up automated pipelines, continuous integration, and delivery pipelines, right? And then observability is key as well, because like I said, when you are constantly making the changes, uh, you are bound to introduce failures, and that is actually an acceptable thing in DevOps. But the main important thing is to have uh, ability to recover from it very quickly, right? And for that, the key important aspect is observability, so that you can know before even the customers know that some issue has occurred, right? So that means getting errors from the client side, client interfaces, getting errors and alerts details on from the server side, from the infrastructure side. So and also from the business side, right? I have released something and I see that the user interaction went down, or conversion rate went down, so something went wrong with the latest release, right? So it's that is what actually observability means. It's not there are other concepts, we will discuss that, I think. So let's move on. So and then test automation is also important, and you can start off with containerization, you can start a bit later, but in a very if you are building an infrastructure or an application from scratch, or you're starting off, then the best thing would be to apply behavior driven development or such approaches, so that you can embed quality from the start. And of course, feature management we discussed. And on the infrastructure side, the key thing is to automate the infrastructure, right? Like if you are using infrastructure on AWS, if you are using on GCP, so the key thing is that you should not need to go to the console to make the changes and or to spin up new EC2 instances. You need to automate that as well. And what happens with the automation, you can then apply the similar practices that you are applying for code application development, right? Code reviews, discussing the changes before releasing them, testing the changes before releasing them, and then making the changes on the infrastructure, right? So and again, the same kind of thing: pipelines, ability, test automation. And then on the infrastructure side, you need to be uh, cater for the scalability and recoverability as well. There are other uh, aspects that come in: operability, maintainability, and the other stuff. But still, I think the key starting points are scalability and recoverability, right? Right. So with respect to the DevOps not being just the automation, we can see here that there are a few different models that have defined DevOps: three-way model or DevOps, Calm and Calms. They are different things that different models that have helped us identify what should be DevOps, because like I said, DevOps was never officially defined. And I think still there's no official definition. But we can rely on people's experiences. And you can see here at the left, this diagram is actually, this chart is showing the current status of DevOps according to 2021 report, that the companies, according to the survey, this was done by the Puppet team, which is a very common tool in the DevOps. So according to the survey, most of the organizations are actually in the mid level of adoption of DevOps. So even the very, it's not really just automation. So even if you have automation, you have continuous delivery, uh, but that is not enough for the companies to say we are fully DevOps. So you can see here that uh, for 20 since 2018 to 2021, the mid level is still there, right? Now people that are not using DevOps have reduced, but mostly are still at the mid level, right? So with respect to the DevOps definitions, right? So three-way DevOps is what tells us that we need to consider uh, three aspects in our organization. We need to embed this thought process in our organization, right? What that means is, from the first perspective, we need to constantly think forward. We should not be thinking of going back or introducing any issues to the back. We should be constantly thinking about how to deliver quality from business perspective to the customer, right? So a constant one-way thinking, where we are trying to make sure that uh, the application or the product can be constantly, uh, or not only just the product, overall the team structure, the culture is updated, so that we can constantly deliver uh, our product moving forward. The processes, every department, every person is uh, thinking about this thing, right? Then we need to get the loop back, right? Amplified loopback is like the complete understanding of the impact of every change. like we were discussing, right? So we need observability, where we can understand where any change is impacting on customer, or whether in the form of errors, or in the form of user experience, in the form of any other aspect that can affect the business, right? And then the third is continuous experimentation. So we are not only thinking about the overall process, we are also internal experimentations and feedback loops, so that we can continue experiment, learn from every stage, learn from every smaller projects, right? So that we can continue to improve. And this again is driven by the whole team, a single responsibility of the whole team. It's not like one team or one member is responsible for this, or the like requirement engineering team is responsible for optimizing the requirement engineering. No, it's a collaborative effort, so everyone needs to take part in improving. Of course there will be ownership, but yeah. So third one is uh, I think if we go into the details of all these, so you will see a bit more, a few smaller points that the DevOps contribute to this in all levels. But again, third one is a bit more, because continuous experimentation becomes more easier when we have DevOps, right? And we will be discussing a bit on that as well. And the comms model says that we have these are different. You can see automation again is just one part of it. So a few other things, culture, so the communication, teamwork, improvement. So these are similar to agile, but the scope of it has changed, right? So because this is also comes from agile, so uh, we need to understand all the other things, sharing, measuring, but then again the scope of things change. And observability, uh, not just on the business side, like whenever we are releasing new feature, but on the on every new task, every new story, or every new code change, how that is impacting, right? So and mapping those changes to the business values, right? So these are few different models that you can explore a bit more on, if you want to understand where you are in your DevOps journey, right? And that would help. But the key important thing to understand is DevOps is not just automation. It will actually require, and we will discuss a bit on what impact it can have, right? And like I said, the key enabler is continuous delivery in automation. So what does continuous delivery mean in is that it defines uh, we need to have a quality built in our whole process, because we are constantly delivering a new piece of code. Whenever I have modified a piece of code, every line we can deliver it to the customer. So failures are bound to happen, but if we can embed quality from the start, then it will be very helpful. And again, agile also already tells us we need to work in smaller batches, but the scope here changes. We need to think of those smaller batches in a way that we can release to customers, right? Every code can go to customer. This is a key factor again, is automation. So computers should be performing repetitive tasks, and people should be focusing on solving problems. And this is again where you can your starting point can be, think of it in your organization, where is the key repetitive task that your teams are doing, and try to automate those tasks, right? That can be the way of adoption of DevOps in your organization. Like for example, when we talked about Docker, how it helps, it will help the infrastructure setup for developers, which is one of the key time consumers for any development team, right? So so this is important for automating the infrastructure. We can have one single command of Docker compose up, and it will set up your local environment for any developer. So onboarding becomes easier, switching to different solutions or different versions of the product become easier, and therefore the developers can focus on actual coding, right? So yeah, other thing is continuous improvement, and everyone is responsible, which these are quite common to again agile. So just a quick question again, if you are able to share, like how frequently are you releasing your product to customer? Do you think you are releasing on daily basis, multiple times a day, or by the end of the sprint? What are your typical release cycles, if you would like to share? Okay, yeah. So thanks again, Shaista. Thanks for taking part constantly. Really appreciated. So yeah, uh, the goal again is to have multiple releases. We should be able to release at any point, and every task that we do should be released as soon as it's done. Right. So that's the end goal. It's not like uh, uh, that was the actual definition of done, right? So every task should be individually released. Every user story, every piece of code that is tested, as soon as we test it, it should be going to production. It should not be like, okay, we can release it tomorrow, or we can release it when two or three other tasks are done, right? And that should be the goal, but of course that cannot be the starting point. So you can do it step by step, right? Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Mohammed. So when we were talking about the DevOps, right, and we mentioned that we need to not only just do automation but bring changes elsewhere as well, right? So this is, you can see one of the models that uh, is recommended for team structure. So we need to bring changes on team structure as well. You can see here that you have stream aligned teams. Stream aligned teams are because you are giving an end-to-end ownership to teams, so you cannot have big teams. You need to divide them into smaller teams and allocate some ownership to a particular set of features of an application, right? Like divide your e-commerce system to the customer acquisition part, the order placement part, the loyalty parts, right? So you can align them according to the business needs and divide those streams, and then have specialized teams to take ownership of that. There are a couple of other approaches, like you can have component based team or feature based team. But typically I prefer a feature based team, right? That you take ownership of a feature. It doesn't need to be whether it's front end, back end, or a particular API or library uh, or a service. Focus on a particular feature uh, that aligns a bit more with respect to the business goals. But again, that depends on the company. So component approach can be used as well. But again, we have stream aligned teams. Then we have platform teams. So the platform team is actually helping the streamline teams, providing them infrastructure as code, providing them software as code, so that sorry, infrastructure as software, so that it's easier for them to spin up any new infrastructure, but making sure that the quality or security or any other aspects of infrastructure are covered, right? Because they are developers, they are not expert in infrastructure, they are not expert in how to spin up an EC2 instance in a secure manner. So what platform team should be doing is giving them a way that they can click a button, or they can make a small change in your infrastructure as code and spin up a new instance, but that new instance is compliant with the needs of your infrastructure, right? With all the security checks, with all the version upgrades, using the latest version, automatically getting updated, applying the patches, right? And any other aspects. Then over the time period, you can see the flow of change, right? So over the time period, you will have to introduce smaller teams, right? You can see here complicated subsystem team that is working with the streamline team temporarily to work on something. This will be a team of specialized people, experts in your company, right, on a particular solution to work on very complicated, like you are trying to introduce some new model for uh, analytics, or something new that the team has not done before, or that will impact your business. So instead of giving it to a single stream, you can group together some experts from different teams, and then they can work on this, right? And then there's enabling team. Sometimes the current stream aligned team is not that skilled to work on a particular new feature that you want to add, or new functionality that you want to add to a feature. So you just spin up a small team that can help them in a way that they become enabled to work on it. This team, this enabling team, is not the one providing or making the solution. Of course, they will be contributing to it, but the main goal is that they do sufficient training for the streamline teams, right? So and there's also other models like Spotify models based on creating guilds and sorry, forgetting the terms, but smaller units along with the streamline teams, right? So kind of similar structure, but different terminologies, right? How does it impact the product planning, right? So uh, if you have heard of like the Hamburger approach for splitting the tasks stories, right? Which is typically done in the agile. So you need to, whenever you are creating requirements, you need to think of it in a way that you can take smaller bites out of it, so that customers can enjoy each bite rather than the whole feature, right? So you divide them into different layers, divide each layer into different tasks, and group those tasks from each layer so that a bite can be taken and that can be released to the production. So thinking about it with respect to the features, taking as an example of loyalty, right? So if you want to add loyalty to your e-commerce platform, so what you can do is you can let's say the easiest way for you is to just add compute start computing the points against order placement, right? So order placement is already there, you can start computing the points. So build the logic for computing points, or assigning some points for the order, and you don't even need to tell the customers that it's being done, but you can start doing that. So develop that one byte out of it, all the things that are needed just to compute it, right? And the next thing can be to actually, once you have that picture, you can actually start telling the customers that we are going to release this feature, because you are already almost there, right? So you are giving them a flavor every step by step, and that will impact your business plans as well, when to send your emails to customers. You are not waiting for the complete burger to be ready or the feature to be ready to announce the new feature to customers. You can plan it in a way that your marketing team can also take advantage of it. Okay, first email can go this week about the new feature of loyalty. The next week, what would be the model of loyalty, how the points will be computed, uh, and let's assume here that you plan to release loyalty. You started to compute the points against the orders, and the layers of loyalty that you identified. Okay, with these many points, will assign it to tier 1 with point number y. They will be upgraded to tier 2, right? But based on your initial analysis right away, you might see there's some issue with your business model around the loyalty points, right? So that is also helping all your business, not just software development, right? So that is what it means to actually shifting to DevOps culture, right? So on the architecture level, you have something a simple monolithic application, and then you are dividing them into uh, different independent. So it's kind of like moving towards microservice architecture or similar architectures, but you don't need to replace everything. You need to evolve. So that is one of the key factors in continuous delivery, that evolve your infrastructure rather than replacing. Okay, the old system doesn't work, let's try to rebuild it from scratch. And impact on development and testing. There are a lot of impacts, but the one major impact is shifting the quality to left, right? So that is key for quality as well. As early as you can identify the bugs, uh, mm, you can mitigate the cost of the impact of the bug, as well as the cost of fixing the bug, right? So that is really important. Now I think we will start discussing a bit more on the tools, right? So you can see here the starting point for us was containerization, right? So you can see here on the left side, it is a Docker file. Let me explain a bit on the Docker file. This is for technical people. You can see the Docker file just tells us where we want to start. An image that has already built-in dependencies. You can start with Debian. You can start with any particular version of Linux or Windows with predefined libraries. Then you can define which set of libraries or any other components that you need to install for your application, right? So whenever I am working on new piece of code that requires a new library, as a developer, I will add that library here, and it will automatically be transmitted to all the environments moving forward, right? So that is how the automation helps us, and bring more consistency. And I think you might have heard the terminologies like it's working on my system but not on yours, right? So uh, this can mitigate, reduce that a lot, right? Of course it cannot remove it, but it will reduce it a lot, right? And then you can see at the right side, it is an example of the Docker Compose file, right? So Docker Compose file, this is the YAML language that I was talking about. If someone is not aware of it already, right? So this is the YAML syntax. Most of the tools, DevOps tools, actually require writing in YAML syntax, right? It is the syntax for how to structure like services is a component that has sub properties. Then you can see here volumes is an array, image is a string type, TTY is a boolean type. So or basically a structure way to define your infrastructure. And you are spinning up two different services, recommendation engine, user DB, and you have written a Docker file, and simply just running Docker Compose up, it will spin up the environment, right? So yeah, these are few the starting point for any organization, right? And these are keywords like images, volumes, labels. Volumes are for mapping your local volume to the container, because containers is a virtualization. So it's a VM kind of thing, but not really a very lightweight of version of VMs. You are mounting your local volume to the container, right? Then you have labels that can be used, and then deployment, you can see here it is stating replicas. So when you do Docker Compose up, it will actually spin up two replicas. So even in your development environment, you can simulate your production environment where you have replicas and auto scaling, right? And you can continue to do that for production environments. Then this one was what was originally discussed a bit on GitHub Flow. Uh, Typically, people follow Git Flow, where you have separate branches for separate releases and versions, right? But for DevOps, I think, or for continuous delivery, what my experience has told me that there should be one single branch of truth, especially for SaaS platforms. It can vary for softwares that are released that have different versions being managed, right? So typically, what you should be doing is you are branching out for every new task, and that task should be tested within that branch, right? And after sufficient testing within that branch, you actually merge it. So you should not be merging until you are confident. You can add a lot of automation and manual effort depending on where you are in your journey, but there should be enough sufficient testing within your branch so that you are more confident, and then you can merge it easily, right? And then you have the pipelines for your Git main branch as well for delivery. So you are testing and making sure of the quality for your main branch, but then your focus should be for each branch, right? And this is a basic high level. So you can for the continuous integration and delivery pipelines. So whenever a code is coming into your main branch, and the same can be said about your um, uh, feature branches as well. So similar things can be done for your feature branch, but of course the production deployment will happen from your main branch, right? So there are two parts to your pipeline: your continuous delivery, and then continuous integration, where you are building, testing the code, running some security scans. These are mostly in the form of static analysis, right? And then you can deploy them into different environments and do manual or automated testing, and continue to move forward to the next environment. And I think you don't need devs and QA and that many environments. You just need staging and production in a typical continuous delivery model, especially for SaaS platforms, right? But for others, you may need a few more. Devs and QA can be the branches that are for your feature branches, right? So here you can see an example of GitLab CI YAML. Again, a YAML format for writing these pipelines, right? So it's very simple to get started. It may look a bit complex, but again, it's very simple, just like Dockerfile as well, right? So you are not building in a very unique language. You are whatever framework for your application is, you can search for a Docker file for that particular application, make a few required changes, and then get started in your project, and slowly and steadily build upon it to improve the security and other aspects. But you can get started very easily, right? Uh, then for this pipeline as well, you can get started very easily. You can identify, because it's just writing the steps that you are doing in a way that the system can understand. So you are already building the packages, you are already running the test automatically, you have some commands to run those. All you need to do is structure them so that the pipeline can run it, right? So in this case, you can see here, it is for Python application. So I'm telling which container image to use. So it will have Python built in with this. I can use my custom images that I built previously, or any other separate image that I built for pipelines itself, right? And then you can see here I have defined stages. So this will define the order of these tests, right? So first it will run build, and then it will run test based on the stages, right? And then in each stage or a job, you are defining what scripts to run, and few other attributes, artifacts, conditions on when to run it. So there are a lot of possibilities there, but for a starting point, you can just go for a simple pipeline, right? So you can achieve all these things through writing a simple YAML file for your GitLab CI or GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions provide a user interface as well, so you can build those using user interface, and the similar approaches can be followed for any other tool. So this was this is a this is the answer for how frequently we should be able to release, right? And especially how we should release to the customers to have better reliability and trust, right? And this is a example of what Facebook uses. You can say it's a bit older sorry, article. It was taken from a bit older article, so maybe a few things have changed already. But you can see here, uh, there are constantly releases, commits coming into your branches, right? So the constant releases are changes are coming, and then automatically those changes are being released to the customers, and the customers are not getting all the releases. All the customers are not getting all the releases simultaneously. So and it's not just for A/B testing, like uh, okay, so it's not just the A/B testing. It's basically needs to be for every release. So you are releasing it to few set of customers, then 2% of customers, then 100% of customers, so that you can reduce the impact. Right? Okay. So with respect to uh, infrastructure as code automation, this is a very basic example. This is an example of Terraform, right? So how does Terraform work? Terraform has predefined resources. So it's very easy. Here you can see an example of spinning up an AWS instance. So you just need to understand the syntax that Terraform follows, the resources that it provides, different providers. You have providers for AWS, all the major cloud platforms, and a few other cloud native solutions like Kubernetes and similar other tools as well, right? So you can just automate this writing such kind of code, and with this you can actually and it provides a modular structure. So what you can do is you can define how to spin up an AWS instance in your organization and parameterize a few attributes so that the developers can take control of that, whereas all the other basic security and other checks are managed by the and those are managed by the operations team, right? So the security is already there. They can the developers can spin up a new instance. So this is a very simple example of infrastructure as code, right? And you can see it's not that difficult to get started, right? With respect to observability, we was what you actually need to get that kind of observability is you need to have logging, matrices, tracing, right? And then you can spin up based on all these things. You can configure monitoring, aggregating the data, and the main thing is getting alerts, right? So the alerting is important, but the focus of alerting should be impact on the business, right? It should be the impact on the business, right? It should not be focused on everything like how if especially in a microservice architecture, right? Whether my compute or my memory, how is my memory being utilized, how is my computer being utilized, right? That is helpful for your analysis and optimization, but alerting it should be done on the most important things that are affecting the business, your latency, error rates, and similar other criterias, right? And this is feature management, so you can enable disable features, right? So it integrates with your application, and you have these kind of toggles. So just click on a button, and this ownership can be given to the product owners directly, so they don't need interaction with the developers or the operations team to enable or release a new feature. The code is already there. They can just toggle a button and release a new feature. Okay, so with this, I think we covered the DevOps part. I think just give me a minute and let me, and then we will move to. Okay, okay, so any questions that with respect to DevOps? I think we had a couple of questions related to the career, right? So, right, if I can just quickly go through, there was a question uh, when one should move from QA and DevOps to DevOps, at what stage they both are interrelated. Uh, again, if your companies are following DevOps, so you can see that the ownership is shared. So QA should actually, QA or developers should actually be taking part in the DevOps from the start. So it's not like a transitioning, but if you want to switch as a career from QA to DevOps, your starting point can be start to contribute to DevOps with respect to the automation. So test automation, So whatever the test automation that you are doing in your organization, start coordinating with them to containerize those test automation, helping them run in the pipeline, optimizing the test execution for the pipelines, and then utilize that experience to optimize other aspects of pipeline and cloud. And I think you will be on a journey to transition from QA to DevOps. Immediate step can be that was also the steps for my experience as a DevOps. I started out as QA and then moving to DevOps, gaining the knowledge. I haven't left QA. It is actually a part of me. Uh, and I believe I learned DevOps to actually to be able to facilitate quality a bit more. Yeah. And does SQA experience or operation experience? Yeah. So whether it's SQA or operations experience, that is actually our developer experience, right? So DevOps has different aspects to it. You need to automate in application, you need to automate pipelines, you need to automate infrastructure, you need to optimize the operations, right? So you can enter into the DevOps from any side and pick up the closest knowledge that is required based on your current experience, right? So whether you're just like QA or your operations, whatever knowledge you have with respect to operations, you should identify the things like infrastructure as code, start learning how to do the configuration management. Sorry, I think I forgot the slide for configuration management, right? So it is also automated through tools like Ansible and other things, right? So you need to start learning that. You have done upgrades, you have done infrastructure management, you have done applied patches. Learn tools that can automate those things for you, right, from operations perspective. And then uh, start doing that for cloud infrastructures or any other thing. And again, DevOps is not for cloud as only for cloud as well. Just like it's not automation, it's not cloud as well. It can be done for on-premises applications, on-premise solutions as well, right? I hope those answers your questions. Any other question that I might have left? Or anyone has any other new question related to DevOps before we switch to QA? Okay, so for quality, again, as we discussed, we need to with modern software development, we need to make sure that the quality is embedded in our process and it's not just testing, right? So quality itself is a very relative term. We need to understand the quality needs of different products is different. For an e-commerce platform, the user experience and the scalability are the key factors. For an uh, on-premise solutions or for banking solutions that are within organization and are a bit more the security is the biggest concern, and the user experience can be compromised, and the layouts can may not be the focus, right? But the computational accuracy as well as the security, right? So these will be the key factors. For safety critical applications, you need to comply with the standards. So the processes, the team structures need to align with those standards rather than your own needs or your own approaches, right? So the quality of the product itself varies, and therefore your testing and all the other aspects related to quality also vary, right? But for any e-commerce platform, I think the biggest factor for software quality is user experience or any consumer centric. It's not just e-commerce, any consumer centric platform is the main definition for that is user experience, right? On a technical term, it can vary. It needs to cover many different aspects, functional aspect, performance efficiency, and in each aspect there are different things: completeness, correctness. Then you have compatibility, usability, right? Reliability and security, and there are a few other things as well, especially with respect to the modern, with respect to the DevOps. Like we discussed, observability should be there from the start. Testability should be there. Automation capabilities should be there, right? So they also start to add in to your software quality attributes, right? So in the DevOps, what we need to do is we need to constantly talk about the quality, right? When you are planning for any task, it needs to be just like in agile, right? It needs to be every team member needs to contribute to the plan, or every members need to contribute to the each story, right? So then that includes the QA as well, and therefore the QA should actually help the product owners define different test scenarios for each user story, right? You don't need to plan for bigger releases, because in general there should not be any big releases, right? Yeah, you can plan for a bigger major testing when you are planning to enable or disable a feature, right? A big feature. But again, the testing should be focused on just like where we are trying to deliver every story to customer. Testing, test planning, and all the testing activities should be focused on each story individually, right? So you need to identify, you need to help the product owners to understand what testing would be required, and also coordinate with developers so that they can understand the testing needs, so that they can uh, contribute towards test automation in this fast pace of development and deployment. If only the QA is responsible for test automation, then it will always be lagging behind, right? So the test automation ownership should be shared with developers, so they will contribute to the test automation, whether it's unit testing, API testing, or end-to-end testing. So they should be contributing, and the QA needs to help them understand, optimize their tests, right? And therefore, in each aspect, we are testing whenever we are merging, we are testing whenever we are building. We need to test the builds, run the security scans, run the code quality checks, right? We will come to those a bit later as well. Uh, Running the release and then running performance testing, mm, uh, other kind of like security scans, constantly monitoring, right? So these kind of things we need to continue to test. So at every stage we are doing some testing. And again, the question that was earlier, uh, for QA to switch to DevOps, right? Or at least start learning about DevOps, you can start understanding what you can contribute at each stage. Like, are you able to monitor the infrastructure or the alerts, and can you help product people to plan for non-technical tasks based on the alerts and errors that are coming from client side, right? So these are few different things that you can start off with. These are few main concepts that we should have. It's not just for testers, It should be for everyone when we talk about testing, so that they understand what it means, right? When we say testing is being done. So testing itself is done to identify the bugs, right? It's not it doesn't mean that it will fix the bugs or introduce the bugs. The purpose of testing is to identify the bugs, right? But then again, this last one, absence of error policy, if I am testing uh, and I say I have not found any bug, that doesn't mean there's no bug. That only means that I wasn't able to find a bug, right? So absence of error policy tells is a mindset that we always need to have. That means there's always an area of improvement. There's always something that we can improve. There's always something that might be causing issues to customers. So we need to constantly evaluate. Even if I am trusting my testing, I'm a very experienced tester. I've tested everything. Everything is working fine, but then still there's a lot of things that might be affecting customers. So we need to constantly improve and constantly evaluate, right? Then exhaustive testing is not possible. We cannot test every possibility, every combination, every permutation. So we need to optimize our testing approaches, for which we will discuss a bit later. Again, shifting left or early testing, as soon as we can start discussing about quality. When we are planning a task or a feature, are we discussing the testing, or are we discussing the different test scenarios, performance characteristics, testability, observability, automation, right? So are we discussing those things or not? So we need to shift everything about quality to the left, right? Here in the planning. In a typical application, you will see there's a few components of a code that are either too complex or were initially written in a very bad way. So for different reasons. So you will see that most of your bugs are associated with a particular piece of code, and that would always help you understand or plan your testing a bit more in an optimal way. So whenever you know a code of piece of code is being changed in that area, or a change is happening that is correlated with functionalities that have a lot of bugs, so you need to uh, you need to do some extra checks, some more detailed effort on this, right? And if you're testing the same application multiple times a day, right? If you're following the same set of steps that you did yesterday, that you did a day before yesterday, right? Or you are utilizing the same test data. So what will start to happen is that you won't be able to identify new bugs. You won't be able to, even this will help uh, align all the rest of the team on the same scenarios. Everyone will be actually focused on the same scenarios, the developers, the product, or any other. So everyone will just focus on that particular aspects of the application. So but there might be some other issues that are being ignored. So this is called a pesticide paradox, right? And again, as I mentioned that quality differs for different businesses or products. So of course the testing approach is context dependent, that we need to identify our testing approach according to the product that we are working on. We cannot apply the same approach for uh, all kind of applications. So with respect to agile and DevOps, few things that can help us in improving the quality or testing efforts. One thing, as I mentioned, it's now a shared responsibility. Everyone needs to contribute to it. It's not just a QA or tester's responsibility. Developers needs to understand testing. Developer needs to understand test designing techniques so that they can optimize their unit testing. They need to contribute to the test automation, right? Product team should be constantly discussing about quality aspects, not just functional aspects. They should be discussing about performance, asking questions. Typically what happens is product team is focused on the functional aspects, and therefore in planning the whole team is discussing only the functionality, right? But then later on they run into performance issues, or they identify performance factors or security factors, and therefore whole plan is affected, right? So product owners may not be able to understand that in detail, but they should be asking those questions in plan. Okay, what would be the performance implications of this change? What security effects can it can have? uh, how much effort will be required for test automation in this? How much will be required for improving the pipeline for it, or any other aspects of it, or observability, adding the observability to it, right? So these are few different checklists that product owners can have, right? And we need to apply techniques like test driven development, behavior driven development, so that quality test scenarios are written before writing the code, right? This risk-based, basically, like I said, the focus of testing should be on the user story and not the whole application or the features, all the major releases. It should be on focused on user stories. So you need to identify what impact each user story can have, identify the risk associated with each story, and then do your testing according to the associated risk rather than trying to test the whole application. And then of course test automation is critical, because without this you cannot trust, and therefore you will have a lot of manual intervention which will slow down your DevOps adoption, right? uh, yeah, so we will come to this. Actually we need to rely on both. The most important thing is behavior of the application or the acceptance criteria. So we need to focus, always focus on behavior driven development, but test driven development uh, will also be useful for developers. So we will come to this. So behavior driven development, when we talk about it, what it means is writing the test before starting working on the user story, right? And we can use Gherkin language. Uh, it's not the only way. It doesn't need to be that way. You can simply write plain scenarios, but the advantage of this is it is doing serving multiple purposes. This Gherkin language is actually creating your test automation documentation. Sorry, testing documents. It is understandable for business people, so everyone can contribute to it, right? And everyone has a visibility of what is being tested, what is automated and what's not. And these same uh, syntax, the same approach can be used as the baseline for your test automation. So there are test automation tools like Cucumber.js and or similar tools in other languages that support this syntax. So this each line will have its own code, test automation code behind the scene, right? It's Gherkin language, Gherkin, Gherkin language. So this each line, like given the Google homepage is displayed, so the automation team can write a script for it. So just writing this line will actually open up the Google homepage. The main thing is given when and then, right? These keywords, It's like prerequisites, the actions, and the outcome, expected outcome, right? So then you can either write single scenarios, or you can write multiple scenarios, right? Like it is data driven in this example. The same test will run for animal, different terms: animal, panda, elephant, python, right? So the question related to behavior driven and test driven, right? So the test driven approach is more effective for unit testing, right? Where it's optimizing the mm, code itself, right? So every class or every component or every function that you're writing, uh, the best way is to write the test for it first, then write the code and make it functional, and then refactor it. So it's not just about testing, it's also about optimizing your coding practice. So first, always the goal is to write what is required. Don't think too much about optimizing the code or writing the best code there possible. First focus on functional code and then refactor it, and refactoring sufficiently enough according to what you have estimated for the task, right? Don't again, in refactoring, don't try to refactor it in a very optimized way, right? Of course, with respect to performance needs, it should be optimized, not really extreme optimization, but something depending on the business needs as well, right? You need to consider the real business value, right? But the limitation of test driven development is it's testing the functions and not the application purpose or the user benefits. So that's why you also need to rely on behavior driven development, right? So behavior driven development enforces you to focus on what values for the customer or the business, right? So that is why you need to take advantage of both. Behavior driven development you can focus on for feature testing, end to end testing, but for your unit components you can test on use on test driven development, right? So every technique has its own benefits, so we can mix and match them according to our needs, right, at different levels. Okay, so just I will pause here for a bit, right? And you can just think about if you are testing the e-commerce platform, right? The checkout process of the e-commerce. So try to write some scenarios for yourself. The what we will be doing is we will discuss some test design techniques that can help us optimize our testing. So just try to write down what you will test for the checkout functionality, and then we will see if the test design techniques uh, will help us optimize a bit more on this, right? So just take a couple of minutes to write it down for yourself. In the meantime, I will take a break as well. In fact, should we just take a few minutes break, right? And we'll be back in 5 minutes, so you can write down some scenarios and take a break as well. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I think let's continue. So hopefully you all have written down some scenarios, right? So again, one thing that we need to consider on is we cannot test everything. Uh, we need to optimize our test cases. So when we will discussing the techniques, so start thinking about whether you might have covered the scenario, but whether you like covered them in the same aspect in multiple scenarios, or did you stretch out your scenarios sufficiently, right? So a few different techniques that we can quickly discuss. I think we are a bit running out of time as well, so uh, I will just focus a bit more on the techniques, right? So here, equivalence class partitioning is actually, you can see here we break down the functionality. So it's related to registration. So registration says that it's open from 1st till 30th. So what we do is we focus, break down in the functionality, and then test at least one scenario for each class, right? So there's a class for testing dates before the first gen, then there's a class for 1st to 30th, and then 30th gen. So even if like I have tested uh, 10 different values and all of them lie in this range, so then my testing is not complete, right? But if I have tested just three values and three of them are lying in each range, then I can trust that kind of testing a bit more, right? And similarly, if I have divided the 30th of date to further based on the discounts, percentage of discounts, so I will have to again divide this class, this valid class of 1 to 30th value, to multiple values, right? So these are again trying to help us optimize our test cases, right? Then the boundary value analysis helps us identify one of the key areas that affect the failure, right? Typically, with respect to coding, what happens is like some errors can happen with respect to the starting point of a loop or an ending point of a loop, or in a condition we might have said less than where it was supposed to be less than equal to, right? So inclusive or exclusive conditioning, right? So that is one key common factor that causes the failures. So whenever we create classes that has ranges, then we can test on the boundaries of each range, right? So when we talk about, let's say, first we need to test the immediate value before this one and immediate value after this one, or there are two different ways: either test three values per boundary or two values, right? So immediate value before this one and this value, and in the 10th case, immediate value after this one and 10th itself. So if you're trying to cover two values, and if you're trying to cover three values, then it would mean testing 9th, 10th, and 11th, right? So that would actually help us improve the quality, right? So whenever you are considering and need to identify the boundaries, and from a technical perspective, it can be the boundaries of arrays as well, like it just doesn't need to be a boundary with respect to the dates or numbers. It can be strings, but if it is stored in an array, then need to check if the array is empty, if the first element of the array is it's working fine, the first element it's working fine for the last element of the array, right? So you need to consider those aspects. uh, then you can convert your requirements into decision tables. So basically you can see here it's a, text-based requirement for how to calculate the equity loan insurance, right? So it is combination of a tabular form and plain text, right? But then you can convert it into a decision table, right? So what does a decision table means? You identify all the inputs that are affecting the business and all the outcomes that the business can have, right? So based on that, you identify all the possible different combinations. This is a reduced decision table, so to optimize your test scenarios. Now, this decision tables are doing, actually, it's not just for testing, right? It's also for to optimize yourself for analyzing your requirements, right? Like here you can see we have covered for less than 17 or greater than 39 ages, right? But uh, we haven't discussed its relation with other aspects, right? Or let's say we haven't discussed this relation of when it's a smoker, how does the age factor will play, right? Especially for 17th and 39, right? So you can raise questions on your requirements as well, because this decision tables will help you identify all the different possibilities of these inputs, and therefore you can identify some unique cases where you feel like we haven't discussed the requirements, right? So it's not just for testing but also for optimizing your requirements, and actually it means shifting left, right? So this will give you a clarity on what is needed for developers, for testers, for product owners. And then state diagrams. Okay, I think we will be just ending quickly, so we can take a break after this for namaz, right? Just a few more things left on the whole overall slide. So again, with respect to the flow, you can draw out in a state diagram. There are very formal ways of creating a state diagram, but you can utilize some any common approach as well, just to draw out how the flow should be, and therefore it can help you identify the test, right? So here, if you have the state diagram, what you need to focus on is you need to focus your test to cover each edge, each line, right? This line should be tested at least once. So all the scenarios that you can focus on, and you can optimize your number of tests so that you can cover maximum scenarios or maximum edges in limited set of test cases, right? But yeah, one thing that you need to consider is don't try to cover a lot of them in single scenario, because that complicates, especially for the test automation, that complicates this things with respect to the maintenance and execution and repeatability of the test, right? So try to balance out of covering the things that in one scenario and dividing them into multiple, but the goal is to have uh, all these lines should be covered at least once, right? So yeah, you can just quickly go through your notes and see if you see some improvement areas or something that these techniques can help you on, right? There are few other techniques, but these are key techniques, I think, that everyone, whether it's tester or not, they should know about it. So do you see if you would like to share anything about like do you feel it these techniques may help you optimize your test or not, uh, based on what you've written so far? Okay, I think I'm not sure if the audience is back or if they are already too exhausted. Right. So just let me try to wind up as quickly as possible as well. Right. So let me just quickly show you this link where you can experiment a bit more on the bugs. So especially reporting the bugs. So you can see here, this application has hidden 23 bugs. So you can try to perform some different operations. But the key thing that I want to show you is how to report a bug, right? So when you are reporting a bug, it should be clear about what you need to identify the severity, the issue types, and frequency, how it's happening, the environments that in which you are tested, the steps that you performed, expected results, actual results, and the sufficient information. Right. So I think this is common. So and if you in this exercise, in this tool, it's a very interesting small game where you can try to understand which techniques are mm, this is especially with respect to the layout or design. So you can play a game and to understand what are the best practices, right? So uh, you can see here a few common issues that uh, in a layout goes against with the best practices. So you can see here there's a gap, so this one should be more better. So it will help you practice a bit more on identifying some small issues. The early ones are very simple, but later on things will become complicated, right? So you can see here the OK is stretched out, right? And this one is focusing on the text size. So you can go for the one that is more aligned with the text, right? Yeah, you can continue to this. So online should be typically represented with green and not blue. So these kind of things, right? With respect to automation, the focus should be on unit tests because it's mm, they run very fast and they are a lot easier with respect to the maintenance as well, right? So the focus should, and it will actually enforce quality shifting left, right? So that is why the focus should be on unit testing and services like APIs, components, and you can have multiple layers in between depending on the structure of your application, unit, component, integration, and then user interface end to end, right? Uh, Unit testing can also be done for user interfaces and then end-to-end testing, right? But the focus should be on the unit testing, right? Especially with respect to automation, right? But of course, business value is important. So BDD is there, but BDD can focus on key business values, whereas API and unit testing can focus on everything for a better coverage, right? I think I will skip the question. Uh, so with respect to test automation, right? So you can see here, I think it's for developers know a lot better on this, but still for everyone, they should aware of what can be done so that they can continue to discuss the quality, right? So this is a button, a layout, a React component for button, and therefore for every piece of code that they write, you need to write test automation. So you can see here, this is a test that actually checks if the text it contains the required text, if it's given, right? Button is expecting a text, it's a component, it will create a button based on the given text and on click operation, right? So you have created a button with hello text, and therefore you're checking if this component will actually return button with the required text, and therefore you are giving it a function, and therefore checking if that function is triggered. and it is simulating this, or it is using a shallow rendering. So therefore you can test the components even if there are dependencies on other components that are not yet developed, right? Now when you're writing unit test, a key aspect is to have code coverage. So always focus on this as well, and not just the unit test. Make sure that you have code coverage. There are multiple different approaches of code coverage. Statement and branch coverage are the minimum, but then conditional coverage, MCDC coverage, depending on the safety critical applications, you need to go further with respect to the coverage. So but again, this should be part of your testing, and again, this should be part of your pipeline. So in a continuous delivery, if your coverage is less than a particular value, the pipeline should not allow moving forward, right? So you can embed these checks in different stages of your pipeline. You can they should not be able to commit it, push it, or merge it if a certain criteria is not met, right? Then you can this is an example of ESLinter for JavaScript. So you can define rules for your organization with respect to the coding structure. So so let me, in fact, I think I'm not running the slides, right? Yeah. So you can focus on different rules here, right? So this will make code writing consistent across your application, right? And it's not just for consistency. There are a few different caveats in different languages that are considered wrong, or considered are typical causes of failures in that particular language. So these linters can help us prevent those issues while writing the code, right? So these linters or tools are embedded in your IDE, can be run in your pipeline, right? So that you can maintain the quality throughout your process, right? And this is a basic example of ESLinter configuration for a JavaScript based application. So you are defining the different extensions to it. Then you are here, you can manage the rules. There are a few default rules that are available. Then based on these extensions and plugins, you are further using different predefined rules, right? But then you can override these rules according to your own organization needs as well, right? Then the focus should be on API testing, which you can use tools like Frisbee or any other different tools. This is a basic structure, but of course it doesn't scale. So you need to optimize this so that the URLs or these things are not embedded in your test. But here you can see just a basic test for your API. So you are defining your URL, and then you are expecting that it returns 200 status, it returns a version in the JSON response, and it returns a title in JSON response. And if you can also check the overall structure of the response, not checking the values. So you can check, you can perform different kind of sessions on your responses, right? So in each language there are different tools, so there should be teams should be utilizing these tools, right? And with respect to functional test automation, this is an example of user interface test automation using Nightwatch, which is again a JavaScript based framework. So you can see here again a simple test for navigating to the page, defining. In UI automation, the key is your selectors. So these selectors should be unique, and you can use CSS paths or X paths. So optimize these selectors so that uh, your test don't fail just because selector is not working, right? Or there's a layout change, functionality is the same, but due to the layout change the selector is not working anymore. So optimize your test, and optimize your application as well. You can embed selectors custom attributes like data dash test dash id, right? So that you can have a unique attribute for test automation that doesn't affect your application performance or application code, right? But your test can utilize those to identify components easily on throughout the page, right? So you are telling the tool to navigate to the page, set a value, click on a button, and assert something. So in this will automatically open up a browser, uh, enters a string to search it, and then click on the search button, and then verify that the results shows the required value. In the test automation, one key aspect is page object models. So instead of embedding everything, these selectors, these URLs into each test, imagine having thousands of tests, having this string, and the selector changes, you change this type to something else. So you will have to do a lot of maintenance work, right? But so you can use page object models where single file represents a page for your application, and therefore all the tests are utilizing commands and selectors from these pages. So your login page can have a command for login operation, and in your test cases you just need to provide the username and password, and the login page will page object model will automatically interact with the page to perform the login, right? So you can structure your automation code. However, just make sure that you do not overcomplicate your automation scripts, because we don't want to test our automation scripts, right? So and there's something that we need to do a balance there. Sorry. Okay, so we don't should not just only focus on functional tests, but performance tests as well. So here's a small snippet of doing a performance check, right? So you can use Puppeteer to do some scans. You can there are multiple other tools as well, but just this one will launch and perform a URL, navigate to a URL, and then get you matrices. And this one is just printing it out. You can perform some assertions that the number of documents or the frames or the timestamp is less than a particular value. It's not exceeding something, heap use size, and you can see here it's not just getting the values on the typical time based, but also on the how the browser is able to process it, right? So your compute utilization, so it might if it has a high value, then it might work for a good environment or a computer or that has good capabilities, but might have not work for typical users that have lower capacity of systems. So you need to cater for all these, right? And you can see here getting started is very easy. You can start out with few different simple scripts, and then later on optimize the structure to move forward. Again, this is another example of utilizing Puppeteer and Lighthouse. So Lighthouse is a Google-based tool that can actually generate a lot of matrices about your performance. I think I might have a screenshot here. No, I don't think I have the screenshot. So you can see here it will again navigate to the page, and it will analyze different web vitals, and Lighthouse is for both web and mobile. No, for it's for web applications, whether it's on mobile browsers or desktop browsers. So it's for web UIs. Works for both web and mobile testing, but for web interfaces. But yeah, you can find similar tools for performance evaluation on mobile as well. And this is a simple scan for simple tool for test for load testing using artillery. You can specify, you can see here you are specifying the target, the duration. You can also specify the different environments for the test, and you can uh, specify different attributes like ramp up time, uh, ramp down times, and other configurations, so that you can simulate the real scenarios, right? And uh, test different endpoints, test different endpoints on in a single scenario, just like your real traffic, right? Yeah. And for all the test automation, one important aspect is the test data. So because your tests are dependent on a particular test data, so you should have a proper approach of seeding test data, whether it's some old data or some data ordered in the previous dates. So you cannot create them at runtime or your test automation. So you should be able to simulate data, and therefore there should be a seeding approach for test data. So it can be multiple ways: adding a custom API in your application just for your test automation, or directly seeding through a backup of data to your DB, right? There can be different ways, but the main goal is that you have a test data and you can seed it to your application. And then for test automation reporting, you should have similar kind of observability like for your application. So you should have reporting. This is Allure specially designed for test automation reporting. There are similar other tools, but you can also integrate this with your monitoring tools of your application, so that you can align these matrices with other matrices of your observability as well. Yeah, I think I will skip this and conclude the topic here. Uh, the most important thing is, in a modern day development, software development, business needs adaptation to changes, and therefore continuous delivery is most important for modern software development, which actually enforces us to the practices like DevOps and built-in quality. And therefore, I think that is why in this slide I did not mention too much on whether it's important for DevOps for startups or not. Think about it is in a way that it's actually uh, is necessity, not even just important. It's a necessity. But yeah, the starting point or the scale of the activities can be different. So you just need to align with your business needs or with your team capabilities, but take help or work with your team to get things done in a way that actually helps the business growth. So with this, I think that's it from my side. And if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to ask, or if there's any question that I might have missed. And yeah, feel free to give any feedback to the team, so that any further presentations can be optimized, right? This one was basically for 101, so it was introductory. We can later on schedule any specific topics that anyone wants to drill into.
Okay, so I think this is the end of it. Or is there something else?
No, that's it from my side.
Okay, so it was a very interactive session, and also it was very interactive as most of our participants were asking questions, and they were also responding to the questions that you are asking. And in the end, I would really like to thank you, Mr. Jawad, for performing this session, taking your time, and Also, I would like to thank all the participants who joined and who participated in the session. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, and hopefully it was useful for everyone.
Okay.